Money Multipliers, and welcome back to another episode of the Money Multiplier podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Kessler, and we ask ourselves, do our dollars make sense? Last episode for 2025. Oh, I'm so excited. Are you all excited for 2026? I'm going to be on for the next episode in 2026, but hey, today I have Brian Fouts coming on. A lot of y'all know Brian. He is a money mentor on the Money Multiplier team, and we're going to be breaking down the financial advice that wealthy people do not follow. Because you've heard the sayings, hey, max out your 401k, save for retirement, live below your means, buy term and invest the difference. And what if this advice is just said to the masses, but if you think about it, these wealthy families and individuals are not following that same advice? What does Warren Buffett tell us? He says if poor people would just start doing what rich people do, they wouldn't be poor anymore. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to copy and imitate what these elite and wealthy families have been doing for generations and generations. So to break it down, Brian's going to be coming on, and he has a way of just exposing the hidden flaws with traditional finance and showing people how the wealthy really think about money, leverage, and control. So in this episode, we're going to be busting the myths, flipping the narrative, and showing you why that safe advice you've been given might actually be keeping you stuck while the wealthy play a totally entire different game. So thanks for sticking around all through 2025. We are not stopping. I will see y'all in 2026 as well, but let's dive into the episode.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Money Multiplier podcast, and I'm your host, Brian Fouts, for this episode. Now, in this episode, we're going to be talking about a topic that, man, I've had a lot of experience with, and pretty much everybody has had experience with, but can also relate to this. And the topic for this podcast is the worst financial advice that wealthy people ignore. Because here's the thing, as you go through life, you're going to get lots of advice around money, around financing. You're also going to learn a lot of things around it as well, because when we're born, we don't know anything about money, right? We learn these kinds of things, and that's our programming. We hear it from our parents. We hear it from the educational system, the government, our employers, those that we surround ourselves with. And so we learn these things about financial, means or financial strategies that, by the way, might not just be true. And by the way, I was very guilty of this. So as I went through my life, I was told, go to school, get good grades, get a good job. And that's exactly what I did. But here's the thing. I found myself about 10 years into corporate America, and I was miserable. And I was massively in debt. And I kind of thought about it, and I was like, why am I so in debt? Why don't I feel like I'm being financially responsible or successful, that kind of stuff. And I kind of realized that when I look back on my life, I had just taken advice from those people around me, but they're in the same situation I was in. And I also looked and said, hey, I'm getting financial advice from mainly my employer or the 401k custodian, right? Whoever was managing that, they're giving me advice. And I realized, I don't think I'm getting the same advice that wealthy people are. And so that set me off on a big journey. Eventually, I was able to connect with and personally work with a lot of Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, his personal advisors. And I started to realize that, guess what? The wealthy, they take a different advice. They ignore the things that the average person hears. So that's what we're going to dive into. We're going to dive into around 5 different topics or advice that the wealthy people ignore that the average person probably is doing or might be doing right now. So let's dive into it. So the first one is one that I heard this when I was working, but I could never figure out, okay, how do I do that and why would I want to do it? And it's the first one is get out of debt at all cost. Don't have any debt. And so I was like, okay, I've got a mortgage, I've got student loans, I've got a car loan, I've got credit card debt. I'm like, how do I get out of this? I can't work any harder, make more money with what I was doing. So I never really understood what that meant. And so one of the piece of advice that I heard from a financial advisor was pay off all debts so that you can then invest. I was like, okay, so I got to pay off debts first, then I can start investing. It's like, okay, that doesn't really seem to make sense, because if I do the math, I'm not going to be out of debt for another 15 years, 20 years, hopefully. And I didn't really understand good debt versus bad debt. And once at that point in time in my life, and now that I do, I understand a lot of us are getting into bad debt because that's what we're told to do. Get a house with a mortgage, get a car with a car loan. All those things are bad debt. And guess who loves bad debt? The banks do. The credit card companies. They like to keep you in bad debt because that's what makes them money. And I realized that early on. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to keep getting into debt, I'm never going to be able to invest. And then once I got around wealthy individuals, I realized they don't mind having debt, but they do it a bit differently. And so I had never really understood, even though I went to college and had a minor in business, I was never taught about assets and liabilities. And once I started to understand assets and liabilities, and then I had a mentor, it really clicked. So here's the thing. So most of us, the advice we get is to go get a liability to have the thing you want. The house, the car, the four-wheeler, the RV, all that kind of stuff. But that's a liability. But when you go and think about a bank, when a bank gives you a loan, mortgage, car loan, doesn't really matter, what is that for them? Is it an asset or a liability? It's an asset. So they have an asset on their balance sheet, and you have a liability. If you have a liability, it's taking money away, whereas on the asset column is bringing money in or making you cash flow, making you money. And so a bank loves to have assets, which is why they love to have you in debt. Now the wealthy, they understand this, but they don't mind using debt, but they call it good debt, right? And so good debt is something that creates cash flow for you. And once I understood that, man, I was like, I want to have a rental property because that to me is good debt. And that's actually what I did. Is one of my first investments that was my own investment, not a 401k, was a piece of real estate. It was a rental property and it cash flowed. And I used debt to acquire it, but it cash flowed positively for me. So the wealthy, what they're doing is they're using good debt, they call it, to buy an asset that cash flows. That cash flow then allows them to expand and go do other things, such as buy the RV or the house or those kind of things. But they'll get an asset first, then the liability, and the asset pays for the liability. And that kind of shifted my mindset really around debt. I realized, okay, there is good debt, there is bad debt. And most people struggle with bad debt because they just keep getting into more and more debt. So first one, get out of debt at all costs. Not necessarily what you need to do. What you got to focus on is good debt versus bad debt, and use debt to acquire assets that cash flow, because that is what a lot of the wealthy do. Right? Now, obviously here at the Money Multiplier, we talk about infinite banking, or IBC, the infinite banking concept, a lot. And infinite banking allows you to take back control of the banking functions in your life and essentially do what the wealthy do, which is acquire assets, but you're the bank at the same time. So it's like having more than one asset. So you're using your own capital, or the insurance company's capital, to be factual, to go acquire assets, but you're also having your money in two places at the same time. So once you understand good debt versus bad debt, and you understand infinite banking, it can even accelerate that process. All right, the second one is max out your 401k. And this is one that I did this, by the way. I had my money in a 401k. I was like, okay, I'm being very financially responsible. I'm putting all this money into my 401k. I'm getting a small match from my employer. And then 2009 hit. And I watched that 401k just crash. I lost 40% of the value in that thing. And I think it's like 4 or 5 years for that value to get back up to break even again. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what else can I do? Because I didn't know anything else, right? When I had that 401k. And so when I started getting around wealthy individuals, and in particular, I was a member of this high-level mastermind, and 401ks were a topic sometimes. The wealthy don't want to lock their money up until age 59 and a half. That's one thing. They don't want to lock their money away. Two, they don't want the IRS to be the one that tells them what they can and cannot do with their money. So they don't want to put their money into a 401k. I'm not saying it's not something you should not do, not financial advice, but the wealthy, it doesn't make sense to them, right? So they don't really do that. And they also don't want to have no access to the money because, hey, can you take money out of a 401k? Potentially, right? But there's going to be penalties, there's going to be taxes, the IRS is going to have control, and so they don't want to do that. So they want to make sure that they are the ones that control their money. They want to make sure that they put it into a vehicle that is private and protected as well. So what a lot of wealthy do is they have infinite banking policies, right? They have these policies and they're taking money off the table, and instead of putting it into, a qualified retirement account like an IRA, 401k, things like that, they put it into things that they control. That could be, by the way, assets like real estate. It could be back into their own business, by the way. They put it into their own business to grow that. and also infinite banking, because infinite banking, it gives them that control, gives them that protection, the privacy of their money, and it's there when they need it. It's also a liquid asset, so they can take the money out whenever they need to use it for something like a deal, an opportunity, grow their business, whatever, but they still have the infinite banking policy earning the same dividends and growing no matter what. So it gives them a lot of flexibility maybe, but a lot of control of their money. Because one thing I realized when I was around wealthy people, they want to control their money. They don't want to give it to somebody else and then just say, and then hope and pray that it grows or be there when they need it, right? They want to be the ones that are controlling where it goes, how it grows, all that kind of stuff. So maxing out your 401k is something that they typically don't do, and it's kind of weird, when you're around high level people, and you're saying, hey, most of them don't have a 401k, but then when you look at your circle of influence, potentially all have like 401ks or those things, you're kind of like, okay, if I want different results in my life, I've got to do something different, and that's what the wealthy do. They do something different. All right, number three is one that man, there's a lot of people that talk about this one. And I had a financial advisor at one point, and this is what they told me to do: live below your means. And that does not sound very exciting, by the way. And I'm not saying that this is not something you shouldn't do, but living below your means is not typically going to help you grow, right? That's not going to build wealth. You don't build wealth and get rich by saving. Okay, and that's typically what they mean is reduce your expenses so you can save a bit more. But that's not going to build wealth. And also that's usually delayed gratification. So I've known so many people that have done this where they will clip coupons, they will deny themselves certain things because they want to save some money. They'll cut their expenses. Oh, I'm not going to have the coffee every morning, right, as an example, so that I can save some more money for the future. Delayed gratification. And it's a challenging one. And what ends up happening from my experience is you do that for a bit, but man, it's not fun. You're stressed out. You see things you want to do, but you can't do them. And so oftentimes you'll use debt then all of a sudden. Instead of, making more or, having more cash flow, we'll use debt to acquire the things that we want, right? And then we'll cut our expenses even more to pay for that debt. And it's this vicious circle that you can get stuck in. I've been there, by the way, and many times. And it took me a while to learn that this is not really the focus. So what do the wealthy do? Well, the wealthy, they want to expand their means, not reduce their expenses. They want to expand it. What's that mean? Well, they're gonna invest their money. They're gonna create more assets, the cash flow. They're gonna grow their business. They're going to expand themselves, expand the way their money works for them. All those things that create that more cash flow, so they don't have to cut their expenses. They don't have to live below their means, as an example. So that's what they do. And it was kind of interesting when I started to learn this. Is the wealthy, they want to have nice things, right? They want to go do these things and have all that. And so how do they do it? Well, they have assets. They invest their money strategically. They focus on their knowledge, right? They gain knowledge so they can have different strategies to put their money to work or to create more income or more cash flow. And that's one of the things that it took me a long time to learn that one, is to look at my net worth, my value, and my time. And I had to value my time more than somebody else. Now, what do I mean by that? So living below your means oftentimes means you're trading time for money, right? And the wealthy, they value their time almost above all else. And it's one of my biggest things that I value, even above money, is my time. Because once it's gone, it doesn't come back. So I want to control my time. And the way to do that is I can't be an employee, right? I can't be trading time for money all the time. I have to have my own businesses. I have to trade my time for something that is worth a lot more, so that I have more time to go do what I want. And that took a long time to learn that one. But living below your means oftentimes it can be a strategy short term. If you're like underwater, you're spending more than you're making, you got to do that. But if you want to get to that next level, you got to grow beyond just living below your means. And one of the things like infinite banking, what it does is it allows you to have that fuel, that capital there that you can put to work to create more cash flow, so that you don't have to cut all those expenses. Living below your means, it's just one of those ones when I've heard that so many times, and I don't roll my eyes. I get it. It's a fit for some people where you're at, but it's not a long-term strategy in my opinion, because it'll burn you out, and it's not fun. Usually it's not fun. Yeah. So the fourth one is, the markets always go up in the long run. I've heard this one before, just write it out, put your money in there and write it out. Well, when I had a 401k, I had money in the markets, and I'll just be honest, that was never going to retire me. I was never going to retire off of that, off of putting, 10, 15% into the markets. Because when I did the math and did all the volatility, I mean, my returns, yes, it would go up over time, but it just was never going to get me to that point where, oh, I can now comfortably retire and have the same income that I have now. No, when I did the math on this in that job I had, man, it was kind of scary because I realized that I'd have to cut my living expenses. And this is like at age 60 or something, or 65, something like that. I'd have to cut my expenses by like 40% or 45% just to make sure that I had enough money to survive to my death. And I was like, man, this does not sound like a very fun strategy. You're working my butt off for, 40 years or more just so that I can like scrape by in retirement. I'm like, man, this sounds miserable. And I realized that when I started getting around wealthy individuals, none of them were going to retire off of that. Now, yes, did they have money in the markets? Yeah, but they put it inside tangible assets mainly. So they wanted to have money that they could control inside a business, inside real estate, or a tangible asset. Yes, they oftentimes had some stuff in the markets, but it was usually in like bonds or T-bills or things like that had a lot more certainty to them. They didn't like the volatility of like a 401k as an example. So they didn't look and say, oh, the market's always going to go up in the long run, I'm just going to dump my money in there. No, they're not doing that. But then when I look back onto when I had my 401k and I looked at everybody else around me, that was the advice that we were getting from the financial advisors at the 401k company that ran that. That was it. Hey, it'll go up in the long run. Just keep putting your money inside there. Do, risky stocks when you're younger, and then move them over to less risky stocks when you're older, all that kind of stuff. But man, I just did the math and I realized this is not going to make any sense to me. And then one thing I did back then is I looked at all the people that I knew that had retired, right? They had retired, and I was like, okay, do any of them have a 401k? Some did, but not one person. And this was like about 8 or 10 people that I knew that had retired. Not one of them was retired off of a 401k, or the 401k was a significant amount of their income in retirement. It was maybe like a 15% of their income. Nobody had a 401k as their main retirement strategy. I was like, well, wait a second, that's the only one that I got. So they had things like, they had pensions. They had things through the state, the government, which wasn't very good, by the way. Some of them had real estate. So they had, I said, oh, yeah, they got real estate. A couple had businesses that they had sold, and they were getting cash flow from that because they had a small ownership. But I realized nobody is doing or is retired off of what I'm being told to do. That kind of scared me. I'll be honest. I was like, okay, this doesn't make any sense. So I got to go do something different. And that was one thing that was kind of a wake-up call for me back when I had that 401k. But then once I got around wealthy people, then I realized, they are doing multiple things to create cash flow for retirement, not just one thing. And I realized, okay, these millionaires, very successful people, they have 5 to 7, sometimes more, but 5 to 7 income streams at the age of retirement. Not one, and none of them had a 401k or market being that one of those 7 things that was going to give them the cash flow in retirement. So that was a big one for me.
Hey, Money Multipliers, pardon the interruption, just really quick. I want to get real with y'all. If you've been carrying around this weight of your financial life by yourself alone, the stress, the confusion, that feeling that you should be farther ahead than where you're at right now, you don't got to keep doing things the hard way. Money Game Live in Tampa, this is a space where people come to finally break free, to rewrite their money story, to stop surviving and start building the life they know that they're meant for. And I'm telling you that something powerful happens when you get into a room of people who are done playing small, who are ready to take back control of their future. You see what's possible. You get the clarity. You meet the people who have done it and been there before. And then you start to feel the hope again. But Tampa is just a couple of months away. It's coming up very, very close, and seats are disappearing. So if this is something that's been kind of whispering to you, hey, I need this, listen to that gut feeling. So go snag your tickets, moneygamelive.com, and give your chance just to breathe again, to grow, and just to believe in yourself. So this is going to be your breakthrough moment, and all you got to do is just show up. And as my yoga teacher always says, showing up is 50% of the work. I will see all of you money multipliers in Tampa.
This one, number 5 here. Number 5 is very interesting. So, by the way, going back to number 4, the markets always go up. And so one of the things that we've done here at the Money Multiplier is we look at infinite banking as something you can put your money into, but it can also be the thing that you can borrow from to create more assets that cash flow. So it can be a good retirement strategy if you combine infinite banking with other assets, because now you can leverage that money in over here. But inside your policy, your money's growing uninterrupted and it has guarantees. And we did the math on it. We looked back and said, okay, if let's say 30 years ago, you put money into a 401k versus a infinite banking policy, 30 years down the road, where would they be? The infinite banking policy would actually beat the 401k because it doesn't have volatility. It's not tied to the markets. So when you remove that volatility, you remove those down years that you have to recover from. If your money is always going up with guarantees every single year, you have a lot more certainty around your money. You have control of it, and you can have multiple strategies with infinite banking because you can take that money and put it somewhere else. Okay, let's go back to number 5. All right, so number 5, this is one that when I think I was in my mid-20s, maybe my late 20s, and there was this house for sale across from the house that I was renting. I was living in with a buddy of mine, and there was a house for sale. I was going to sell it, the gentleman. And I was talking to some people in my life, and they're like, oh, buy that house. It's going to be your best investment. I was like, okay, that makes sense. It's going to be my best investment. They're saying it's going to be a great asset for you. Okay, so I went and bought this house. It was very hard to do. I had to get a 7-year ARM mortgage. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, moved in with me and helped pay the mortgage. And then I had to refinance the house into a 30-year mortgage, all that kind of stuff. And I remember I was, maybe 5 years into that house, and I was like, this doesn't feel like an asset. It feels like an anchor, right? I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I go, I'm getting this advice. This is my best asset, but it doesn't feel like an investment. It's a home. It's not a house. It's a home. How's this an investment? And I really struggled with that whole thing. And then once I started learning about how money truly works and got hooked up with some real advisors and financial planners that thought differently, I learned one thing. A house is not an investment if you live in it, because the only way that it can give you a return is if you sell it, right? Or you go get leverage and get bank financing. I never thought about that. I thought an asset was something that gave you, value. But in reality, the way the wealthy look at it is an asset gives you cash flow. And I was like, oh, my house does not give me cash flow. In fact, it's the opposite. It takes cash flow away because of the mortgage. So I'm like, wait a second. So if I leverage the house, it's a liability. And that's when I started to understand liabilities versus assets. And I was like, well, how do the wealthy do this? Well, here's the deal. So let's say a bank's going to give you a mortgage. Well, by the way, mortgages are not good financial vehicles or loans. They are very, very disastrous for most people, even though we don't realize it, because they take so much money away from you. And why do I say that? Well, a mortgage, 30-year amortized mortgage, is structured in a way that basically 80% of all the payments in the first 7 years go to interest. Now, why is that? Now, I didn't know this, and right, and my mortgage broker probably didn't even know this either. Well, back in the 50s or whenever baby boomers were starting to come back and had a big need for housing. So this is back, I think, in the 50s is when it was. Now, mortgages didn't really exist. They did exist, but not in the fashion that we know of them today at that point in time. And so what happened was, and this is kind of my belief just upon my study, is the bank said, okay, we have all of these people that need housing, but they don't have the cash to do this, but we do. So wait a second, what if we give them loans, mortgages, but we finance the majority of the house, not like 20%, but we finance 80% of it. But wait, we need to make, a good return. Well, guess what? The average family moves every 7 years. So what if we do an amortized mortgage or loan and we front load the interest into the first 7 years, knowing that, guess what? When they move and get another mortgage, they reset that interest clock. By the way, banks love to tell you, hey, refinance your mortgage. Hey, you're only 5 or 7 years into it. Refinance it at, instead of 4%, at 3%. It'll save you money. Your payment will go down. But if you do the math, that might cost you so much more down the road because you're resetting that interest clock. And I never knew any of this. And nobody talks about this. Nobody teaches this kind of stuff. So we're all out there getting these mortgages. And also, by the way, why is a mortgage 30 years? Well, back then, you'd get a mortgage when you're, let's say, 30 years old, right? You've saved up enough for a down payment. You can get a mortgage. Well, guess how long it is till you retire? About 30 years. So what are the banks pitching? Get a mortgage and be debt-free and own your home when you retire, right? And people loved that because some people remember the Great Depression back then. They didn't like that, right? Because they lost their homes because they had these mortgages. So they don't want to have mortgages. So they loved the idea of, hey, when I retire, my mortgage will be gone and I'll own my home and I can't lose it now. So it was this whole big pitch, but reality is the banks are making a ton of money because of these amortized mortgages. The wealthy don't do that, right? They understand that, hey, if a bank's going to give you a loan, a mortgage, what am I going to go do with it? I'm not going to go get a house. That's a liability. It's an asset for the bank, liability for me. I'm going to go get an asset. So they give me a mortgage. I'm going to go get a duplex or a fourplex or a rental property that's going to cash flow. I'll do that a couple of times. All of a sudden, I've got cash flow. If I go get a home for myself and my family and I get a mortgage or I get a HELOC or I buy it some way like that or I buy it owner financed, my assets are now paying for my liabilities and I'm good, right? So if you're going to get bank financing or they're going to give you money, don't just jump onto the liability train. Go get assets first and then go get the helm. That's a lot more secure than just getting the mortgage. But here's the thing. A lot of people aren't going to go to the work or do the effort to get those properties. That's where the wealthy look at it differently. They're saying, hey, I'm going to go put in the work so that I can be more comfortable down the road. All right. So I guess one of the things that I saw the wealthy do is that they'll hustle kind of in the earlier years so they can have an easier life down the road, whereas most people are just hustling all through their life. So yeah, I've never really viewed my house as an investment. I don't really view it as an asset anymore. And even like infinite banking, by the way, what I've had people do is they'll use a policy as like the seed to go create assets or get assets and create cash flow. And then once they have enough cash flow coming in through infinite banking, through leveraging their money out there, then they'll go and get a house and they'll have all these assets. Like I just explained, the wealthy do it. They'll have the assets pay for the home and then they're free and clear to go then and take their money they're making now instead of going to a mortgage because the assets are paying for it. They'll put that money to work in other assets and create even more cash flow. So and it gets easier and easier. Now, I want to share another one. So that was five, the main five. But the other one that I really kind of like that I've heard differently from different advisors, but this is a piece of advice that when I was younger, it had disastrous consequences for me financially. And it was diversify. Spread your money everywhere. So I had a job, I was making good money, and I had this financial advisor who said, hey, diversify your assets. Right? Diversify your money, put it in multiple buckets all over the place. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know what those buckets were. I didn't have the knowledge about those investments. And I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars by doing this. And it's on me. I was young and just was taking the advice I was given. And once I kind of got out of that rat race and was, an entrepreneur and I was around successful people and I started hearing their stories. Now, when they're very wealthy, they diversify, right? They'll have multiple streams of income. They might have a couple businesses here, rental properties, and other assets and stuff like that. But what I realized is, how did they get there? Well, most of the time, it was not by diversifying when they first got their start. It was by focusing on like one thing. And that one thing usually was something they were very good at. It was something they understood, something they can actually control. So as an example, let's just use real estate as one. So a lot of people that I ran into that were very successful, if they got their start in real estate, it's because they focused on real estate. There were other strategies and things they said, nope, I'm gonna ignore those right now. I'm gonna just focus on real estate and do the best I possibly can at this one thing. And then once that thing was successful, then they could take the cash flow and then go do other things. But they would get this thing going, and then they might switch their focus to something else and focus on that thing. Because if you're scattered, you're going to have scattered results. And at the very beginning, that's what I did. And oh my gosh, I mean, I look back and I look at the things I was doing. I'm like, why did I even do that? It was a shiny object, by the way. You probably heard of shiny object syndrome. That's what I was doing. I was just chasing all these things, and I was essentially like doing like 20% on each one. So let's say you have like 10 different things or 5 different things you're doing, and you're only focusing 20% on each one. Well, guess what? Where your focus goes, your energy flows. And my energy was diversified, and it was really spread thin. And so these different strategies started to fail. And then I realized, you know what? What if I did the opposite? Instead of just focusing 20% on each of these 5 things, I focus 80% of my time, my money, my attention, emotions, all that on one thing. And that's eventually what I did. And I did that in real estate, and I had success in real estate. Then I did it inside of another business, had success in that business. And now I do it inside, I focus on infinite banking. And I realized that, man, if I had that advice is, don't diversify, focus on one thing and be the best at that, be successful at that one thing, and let that be kind of your stepping stone or the thing that catapults you to everything else, man, it would have saved me probably, I'm going to say, 5 to 10 years of struggle and challenges, all that kind of stuff, because I was just spread thin. And so that's when I looked at the mentors that I had that were wealthy people. They all had like that one thing, and that was their story. Here's the one thing I did that really had that success that allowed me to go do all the other things you see. Like I remember one of the gentlemen, he was the guy on Shark Tank, the first shark on Shark Tank, many years ago, of course. And he was very focused on a marketing and how to sell things at trade shows. And so that's what he did. And he was very successful at it. But he was at a trade show, and he was watching this guy, the Ginsu knife guy. And he was cutting through these Coke cans, and everybody was watching him, and everybody was buying these knives. And he's like, that's pretty cool. And he goes, how do I take this thing that I'm focusing on, which is trade shows and how to sell things at trade shows, but how do I get it from, the small group setting to the masses? And the story goes that like that night or like later on, he was at home watching a late night TV show. And then when it ended, it went to that white screen, white noise. If you guys remember that, some of you might be too young to remember that, but it was this white noise. There's nothing on. And they came and had that thing that comes up that I can't remember what it looks like, but it's like a little circle. And so he said, well, wait a second. If I'm sitting here watching this and I'm going to go turn off the TV, how many other people are in their living rooms sitting here doing the exact same thing because there's nothing else on? If there was something on that was entertaining, would they watch it? And he came up with the infomercial. And it was that Ginsu knife cutting through the Coke can. And he made a lot of money, and he focused on that for a long time. And he had this strategy of you market this product in front of people a certain way. And he just took that from, not one-on-one, but one-to-many inside of a trade show setting to then the TV, and then it grew from there. So he focused on that, and then that allowed him to become an investor in multiple other businesses that made him a billionaire. And it was a really cool story, but he talked about how he focused on this one thing at the very beginning, and then that was the seed or the funding that allowed him to do other things. But he had to do that one thing first. And I've heard that story, other versions of it where someone focuses, they have success, now they do other things. In fact, there's a mentee, someone I mentored in the real estate space, and I remember he had some struggles at the very beginning. And I told him this is my piece of advice for him. I said, okay, you've only been doing this for about 6 months in real estate. So here's what I'd recommend you doing, because if you don't do this, what are you going to go do? He goes, well, I'm going to go, try to learn this strategy and work my job. And I'm like, hey, you started on real estate. Just focus on this. Give it 3 years, right? Give it 3 years. And the reason why I said 3 years is because that's when I typically see the average real estate investor start to really grow and take off. It takes about 3 years to get into it and really get your legs under you, get that foundation going, and then it starts to really work for you. And fast forward now, that was like 10 years ago. He's a multi-millionaire now and is doing incredibly well. And he just focused on real estate and doing certain strategies, owner financing to be at the very beginning. And then once that was successful, then he started acquiring properties Then he became an agent, real estate agent, and started selling multi-million-dollar properties. And then he started doing bigger things. But he started with just focusing on one strategy, owner financing in real estate, and then started layering other strategies on top of that once he had that success. But it took about 3 years. And then after that, man, he quit his job and he's on fire. And to this day, he is just doing incredibly well. But he had to have that focus. So once again, diversify, spread your money everywhere. Not something that I would recommend for most people, not financial advice, of course, but for me, it was very disastrous. And when I study wealthy people at the beginning of their journeys, they chose one thing to focus on, made that a success, and then grew from there. So everybody, those are kind of the things that I would start thinking about in your own lives. When it comes to building wealth, when it comes to taking advice from those around you, just keep this in mind. Keep it in mind. What are, the wealthy doing differently than everybody else? Because if you want different results, you got to do something different. And by the way, the wealthy are typically doing something different. All right, with that, I'm Brian Fouts. This is the Money Multiplier podcast, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.
What a powerful conversation with Brian. In this episode, you really get to rethink the financial advice you've been trained to follow. Good, and that's exactly the point. And the wealthy aren't playing the same rules because they understand something most people don't. It's not about the advice that you follow, it's about the system that you operate in. Because if you think about it, how are these wealthy people and why are they building these systems and not waiting until 65 to go and retire to then live their life? Right? I always say it, time is the only resource that you cannot get back. So how can I program and design my life so that my pocketbook is not dictating how I'm spending my time and where I'm spending it at? So I really hope that y'all got a lot of value here in Brian. He is really a wealth of knowledge, and we just need to understand that the wealthy prioritize control, cash flow, leverage, and uninterrupted compounding. That's exactly what whole life insurance, the infinite banking concept, gets for you. And they don't just hand over their money to Wall Street and fingers crossed, hoping for the best. So they don't depend on the traditional retirement plans. They definitely don't build wealth by accident. And like I said, that's just the foundation of the infinite banking concept. So coming up here soon as well. I know we've been talking about it, but hey, come and join us in Tampa. We're going to be getting in 2 days intensive training. Not intensive, okay? It's going to be easy to absorb, but it may just be a different mindset shift than what you've been conventionally taught. And so we're going to be getting into how do I build wealth using oil and gas? How do I build wealth getting into multifamily? How do I build wealth by legally minimizing my taxes on my investments that I'm making? Come and hang out, moneygamelive.com. I will see you in Tampa at the end of February, and you know you need to be there. It's the start of the new year. I know you have goals and aspirations of where you're trying to get to, and don't cut yourself short. Get in the room, get around those like-minded people who have done it, who have failed in it, and then rose right back up to the top. Again, thank you for being here for all of 2025, and I will catch you next year in 2026. Have a wonderful New Year's Eve, and don't do anything that I wouldn't do, okay? All right, I love y'all, Money Multipliers, and I will catch you into the new year. Mwah. Catch you then. Thank you, Money Multipliers, for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoyed this and you want to learn more about the infinite banking concept, click right here. This takes you to my powerful 90-minute presentation explaining in depth how, why, what is the infinite banking concept. I will see you next Tuesday. Catch all you Money Multipliers then.